The Chelmsford seat, as it happens, is the seat I know of earliest days politically, because my godfather, the late Norman St John Stevens, represented it and got down to a majority of about 300 in his last election. And my honourable friend, I'm glad to say, has done a good deal better in her election. And as I was listening to her speech and her affection for her constituency, and her note at the end that they put up to statues to their most distinguished denizens, I'm sure that one in due course will appear to her. And I think we are very lucky to have somebody who so thoroughly understands the European politicians joining our House at this time. I now want to move to the tragedies that have affected this nation in recent months. The terrorist outrages which we must never assume to be routine, that as they happen with increasing frequency, or have happened with 4 of them in such a short time, we mustn't allow their repetition to lessen our horror or our determination to win through. And then the Grenfell Tower, which I happen to think is an even greater tragedy, because it seems to me that it was preventable, and the deep sadness and the horror of what happened there is something that all of us in public life must ensure that we work out how that can never happen again, because though that is often said that something should never happen again, it is not always within the power of man to ensure that is the case. I think with Grenfell Tower, it ought to be possible to ensure that something of that kind never happened again. And I'm sorry for that long preamble, Mr. Speaker, but I thought it was important under these circumstances, before I move on to the Queen's speech, in the context of the general election. Now, the general election we basically fought in the way Stanley Baldwin fought the 1929 general election. He ran on the slogan, safety first, and we ran on the slogan, strong and stable. And I think the two are the same, and the two are both deeply unappealing. He lost in 1929, and we underperformed in 2017. And I use the word underperformed for the sake of accuracy rather than as an effort at spin. And we've got to ask ourselves, why does this safety-first approach underperform? And I think the answer is that the voters don't then feel that you're on their side. They feel that it's business as normal. And yet we know from the Brexit vote, and we know from the vote at the last election here, not to mention the United States and what's gone on in the continent, that voters are fed up with business as normal. And that's where we must look to the Queen's speech to decide how business is going to be changed. What are we going to do to make people's lives better? One of the titles of the Pope is the Servus Servorum Dei, the servant of the servants of God. Mr. Speaker, that is how we should view our role as the servants of the people of the United Kingdom, who I happen to think are also the people of God, and that we must work to ensure that we can help them lead better, more prosperous lives. And with Brexit, that is a great opportunity, an opportunity we're not talking about enough. But the lessons of free trade are that you produce better standards of living for people because they can buy goods more cheaply. The biggest burdens that the EU imposes are on food, where the tariffs are so high that we can't really import any. And then the biggest generators of revenue in this country are clothing and footwear. So what is attacked by the protection in the single market and the customs union is the things that are the most important part of the basket of goods bought by the poorest in the land. And we want to get rid of that so that they keep more income in their pockets to spend on the things that they want or to save, with all the concomitant economic advantages that leads to, that people can buy other goods or they can deposit money, the money can be invested, business can grow. And if we move out of this protectionist European approach, people will have a higher standard of living. And that is essential. And it's not about having bad regulations and a free-for-all. Many countries in the world that we trade with have higher standards than us. The United States has different standards, but the United States does not poison its people. The Australians don't poison their people. But the goods we buy from them would be cheaper. And that will help the poorest in our country. But we need to look at some of the things specifically in the Queen's speech to stand up for those who have big business weigh down on them. Now, I'm not anti-business. I've been in business all my life. I'm pro-business. But this statement that Her Majesty graciously read about unfair practices in the energy market, even I had Scottish Power writing to me saying they'd send in the bailiffs when they had sent me a bill that was 10 times, actually nearly 15 times, what it was meant to be. And frankly, it's all right for me. I'm quite capable of writing back to them and making sure they don't send the bailiffs round. But when they do that to our constituents don't necessarily have that easy ability to get in touch with the right person to stop this sort of nonsense happening. Some of these companies are aggressive and skew the contracts in their favour. That doesn't mean I want to see a price cap, but I do want to see some fairness and, Mr. Speaker, us being on the side of our voters. I want to finish with housing, because Grenfell Tower has really brought this home to all of us. Because the problem with Grenfell Tower is a very deep-seated one. It goes back to the point at which it was thought popular to put up tower blocks as an exercise in social engineering. There are opinion surveys going back to the 1940s, and when people are asked what type of property they want to live in, 80% say houses, 2 or 3% say tower blocks. What, Mr. Speaker, did the politicians and the bureaucrats give to the people so that there are 4,000 of them now blighting our landscape? We gave them tower blocks, which they did not want. We then decided that there would be some refurbishment of them, and the refurbishment was very expensive. Hardly a penny seemed to have been spared, except on safety. So they might have been very environmentally friendly, and they might have looked a little prettier than they had before. But £8 million was spent on refurbishment, and the 5,000 to make the panels fire secure was not spent, and the 200,000 for sprinklers was not spent. This is the worst type of bureaucratic imposition, and what we should be saying is that any family that goes to sleep in a tower block tonight frightened because they've got the same cladding, and that their children are having nightmares, that whatever the difficulty, we will find somewhere else for them to live. And the numbers may be great and the problem may be vast, but we must show we are on people's side. And then we must recognise that people want houses, not tower blocks, and we must build them houses and get rid of tower blocks, and then allow them, as Margaret Thatcher did, to become homeowners. If we do that, we will be on people's side. We will support our electors. We will be, like the Holy Father, Servus Servorum Dei.